Sigmar is on the back foot. His Stormcast Eternals are desperately trying to hold the line against the endless Skaven menace running rampant across the realms. And they are beset from within by the curse of reforging. Chronicles of Ruin, a hero's burden.
"Well, Bez," said Rion, hefting her storm spear and reaching out for her helm, "what do you reckon to our chances this time?" Once, that question would have brought a quip or a self-conscious bit of bravado from her fellow Vindicator, a shrug or a sigh at the very least. Now, she got nothing back at all, and that filled Rion with an almost unbearable sadness. Basira was standing bolt upright and unnaturally still, gazing out across the ash and ruin of Ratham's crook. Her once sparkling eyes were devoid of anything but a sort of blank watchfulness. They had been like that for a long time, but Rion had still not become used to it. It had started back in the bitter campaign against the Scourwind Reavers, and Bez had died 3 times since then. Each time her soul was broken apart on the anvil of apotheosis, she came back a little colder, a little more distant, a little less the friend Rion had fought beside for so many years. "We have not killed enough," Bez said. "The Ratmen are too many, and we have little to counter their artillery. We can withstand perhaps one more assault." If we're lucky, Rion thought. There were fewer than 30 hammers of Sigmar left to safeguard the crook, a scattered assortment of infantry, some archers, and 2 griff riders. This was all that remained of an entire brotherhood after a month of bitter, attritional warfare. Out here on the edge of the Nor, there was little chance for reinforcement, whether Hazir sent or otherwise. 20 or so Freeguilders remained standing, but barely so. They were running out of munitions, and more importantly, food. Rion approached her friend and placed a hand on Basira's shoulder. "We've endured worse," she said, wincing at the forced lightness in her voice. Basira said nothing. "Remember the Pyre Gate? You and I alone against a horde of Kull's Reavers. By the end of it, I had a spear through my thigh and a severed hand. You didn't even have a scratch. 4 days and nights of fighting and not even a graze. I always thought you had Sigmar's own luck. You remember that?" Basira stared at her, and a sudden flicker of pain flashed across her pale face. She looked away. "No," she said quietly. "I hope it is a good memory, Rion. Keep it for me." The words sent another shard of glass lancing through Rion's heart. How many deaths would it take before her friend was erased completely? She had little time to dwell on the thought. A signal arrow rose to the sky, loosed by one of the perimeter scouts. It traced a high arc over the strong point, disappearing over the cliffs to the left. There was a scurry of motion and a chorus of urgent shouts as Stormcast and Freeguilders ran to man the defences. The Skaven were back. Rion and Basira hurried to join their comrades who were mustering at the foregate. The entrance to the crook had once been a sturdy portal of igneous stone, but warp fire and explosives had reduced it to little more than a cluster of piled debris, a glaring weakness in the strongpoint's crumbling defences. Some enterprising Freeguilders had thrust a few pikes into the ground to form a crude but effective obstacle. There were several decomposing Ratmen hanging from the spear points, unlucky casualties of the last assault. 100 paces or so beyond the gate, the narrow canyon boiled with motion. The rats came on in a gushing tide, packed so tightly together and moving so fast that they took on a strangely liquid quality. Shots rang out. It was impossible to tell how many of the Fusilier's rounds smacked home into that amorphous mass, but when the Guilder's sole remaining great cannon roared, it smashed a gory furrow through the tide of fur and flesh that was all too hideously visible. The crackling arrows of Vigilance whipped down from above in vicious flurries as the archers did what they could to thin the flood. The Sigmarites' volleys were answered by searing trails of warp lightning from some distant battery of enemy war machines. The screeching bolts punched holes through defences and defenders alike, melting stone to bubbling slurry and disintegrating men and women where they stood. The snap-crack of long rifles grew in intensity. Rion had to step back to avoid the falling corpse of a Fusilier knocked from the ramparts. The man had a neat hole drilled straight through his head, and ugly wisps of green smoke rose from the wound. Ugly-looking wisps of green smoke rose from the wound. "Race!" shouted Vindicator Prime Lucian, and the Stormcast set their shields and held their spears at high guard. On Rion's left side, Segnin was belting out a battle prayer, his voice high and eager. A few more Vigilers began to join him in song, but most of them were too fatigued to do so, for even their supernatural endurance was sorely tested. "A cask of Duardin ale says we don't die," Rion muttered to Becerra, whose shield touched her own. Bez glanced at her and nodded stiffly, accepted. In a chorus of mad, screeching howls, the rat-men met the walls. Driven by their sheer momentum, many were impaled on the palisade spikes. Others fell and were trampled into the dirt by their own kind. Some leapt at the outer ramparts, trying to scale the rough stone and get to the gunners above. A great gush of stooped figures poured over the shattered blockade and hurled themselves at the hammers. The rat-men's eyes were raw and mad, their stench an acrid alchemy of fear, eagerness, and hatred. A score of Vigilar spears struck out with crisp similarity, and the first of the enemy perished before they released their doom. Rion's own weapon sank through a Skaven warrior's scrawny chest. She withdrew it and sent it jabbing back half a dozen more times into different targets. Dead rat-men began to pile in front of the hammer's position, but the press was relentless. Screams rent the air. The artillery onslaught became a one-way affair. The walls screeched and shuddered under a ceaseless thunder of impacts. The great cannon was silent. Rion could spare no time to look, but she guessed that those damned snipers had slain the last of the gun crews. Stormcasts began to fall. The rats simply swarmed over them, their cruel blades scraping along the seams of Sigmarite armor until they found ingress. Lightning cast the battlefield in strobing colors, both the pure white of discorporated Azerite energy and the Skaven's foul green art. Sorely wounded comrades fought on, killing until the moment their bodies dissolved into screaming bolt and leapt for the skies. The line was somehow holding. It was the same with the rat-men, Rion told herself. If you could withstand their onslaught, the sheer scale and ferocity of it, for those vital opening moments, you could weather the tide until their spirit broke. But that was the other thing with these wretched creatures. The moment you thought you had them figured out was when the dagger slid into your back. The ground lurched beneath their boots. Dry-baked rock splintered, and there was a deep, doom-laden sound, like a cave worm grinding its many fangs. Rion risked a glance behind her, and saw the floor of the compound give way as a great maw of churning metal emerged from the depths, showering them with a lethal hail of stone fragments. The devilish engine rose up into the air like a breaching whale, and came smacking down atop a cluster of screaming free-guilders, crushing them. There was a moment of stunned calm, the entire battle seemingly pausing to take in this shattering turn of events. Then, a great metal plate on the side of the drill machine fell away, and screeching warriors spilled out. Not only the enemy's wiry foot soldiers, but also the hulking and slavering horrors taller than any Stormcast, their bodies marred by crude stitching and seams of pulsing warpstone. "Fall back!" Vindicator Prime Lucian was shouting. "Back to the second line!" The last line. Little more than the burned-out skeleton of the old Strongpoint barracks, gutted by fire and filled with the dying and wounded. There they would fight as one until they could fight no longer, and then they would be cut down, one by one. Rion was ready to obey her Prime's command when she noticed that her right flank was open. A Ratman came scrabbling in to attack her, but she rammed the edge of her shield into its face, then kicked it in the chest hard enough that she felt ribs shatter. Bez was out of sight. At first Rion thought her friend had fallen, but a glimpse of Sigmarite showed she was still fighting, ignoring Vindicator Prime Lucian's order. Rion's breath caught in her throat. Becerra was surrounded by corpses. A circle of Skaven hissed and clambered around her, trying to summon up the courage to attack en masse. "Bez!" Rion cried. "Retreat, damn it!" Her friend stared at her for a moment, and Rion saw no kinship in those crackling eyes, nor even the hint of recognition. Becerra was gone, consumed by a passionless killing zeal that Rion had seen before on the faces of lost comrades. That hollow look of those one too many times reforged, whose souls had been worn down until they were brittle, joyless things who craved only righteous battle. Thinking their foe distracted, the Skaven closed in. That was their mistake. Becerra moved with terrible swiftness, lashing her spear about in a wide semicircle to smash two ratmen from their feet, then stabbing out once, twice, 3 times. Several more corpses joined the pile of the Vindicator's feet. Rion saw the rat ogre out of the corner of her eye before it struck, a mass of rancid, waxy flesh and muscle, moving with the speed of a pouncing lion. It barreled through the press and smashed into Becerra, bearing her to the ground. "Bez!" Rion ignored the cries of her retreating comrades and raced to the aid of her friend. The foe was clustered tight together, but she lowered her shield and smashed straight through them, desperation lending her strength. The snarling, bloated fiend was raking dagger-length claws down Becerra's plate. Strings of acidic drool dribbled from its oversized maw, and the scars that crisscrossed its back pulsed with a hideous bile-green light. She drove her spear deep into its side. It reared and howled. Becerra, her armor rent in a dozen places and gushing blood, somehow freed herself and slammed her fist into the beast's jaws, shattering teeth. The rat ogre recoiled, then it seized the stricken Stormcast and hurled her into the air. Becerra's body flipped like a rag doll. She landed on her neck with sickening force. "No!" cried Rion, knowing she was already too late. She sank her spear into the small of the monster's back. This second blow saw it reel, howling and clutching at the wound. Still, the cursed thing would not fall. It lumbered at her, screeching mindlessly. One swiping paw struck Rion's shield dead center. The force of the blow knocked her off her feet. She landed on her back, dazed. Through a blurry haze, she saw the beast looming above, bringing both its fists up high to crush her skull. A shadow engulfed them both. Something vast plunged down and seized the rat ogre in gleaming talons. The fiend was lifted from its feet and carried through the air by the winged behemoth. Then it was brought crashing to the ground in a surge of leathery wings. Rion saw a coat of red scales and a flash of golden armor, and a roar split the air. She crawled towards Bez, spear in hand. The foul skies that roiled above were sundered by blistering lances that speared from the heavens. Storm energy was released in a shattering boom that sent ratmen flying, their flesh scorched and blackened. The dust picked up from those impacts obscured the battlefield, and then Rion heard chanting. Low, sonorous voices joined in a dirge that spoke of battles long ago and comrades lost but not forgotten. Grim, silent figures emerged from the dust cloud, their towering silhouettes somehow familiar and yet terribly strange. They drove into the dazed ranks of the Skaven like the God King's own hammer. Now, the screams that split the air were the faltering cries of terrified rat-men. Armoured in dark gold, these Stormcast slew with the same brutal coldness that Becerra had displayed. Where their blades swung, the enemy was hewn and hacked to pieces. Their frenzy forgotten, the rat-men began to break, fleeing in a messy, haphazard tangle of tails and limbs. Despite this unexpected reversal, the battle had faded into irrelevance in Rion's mind. Her eyes were fixed upon Becerra. Her friend lay still, her helmet ripped from her skull to reveal an ugly wound. A mortal wound, certainly. The Vindicator's blank eyes stared at Rion dully. Half-formed words bubbled on bloody lips. "Yes," Rion said, wiping gore from the warrior's cheek. "Let go, my friend. It's time for you to see the stars of Azir again. I'll meet you there." Rion felt a hand fall on her shoulder. It guided her gently to her feet. "I have come for your comrade," the newcomer said. The words were little comfort, for they were spoken in a voice that rattled like a death hiss. But they were not without pity. She turned to see the warrior who had descended upon the dragon to save her life. His helmet was a stark skull, his armor lined with bones and symbols of the Relictor Temple. She knew him on sight. All of the First Forged host knew of Ionis Cryptborn, hero of the Realmgate Wars. She had heard rumors of his grim new duties, though until now she had wished they were nothing but hearsay. "Warden of the Lost," she whispered. "Bid your friend goodbye," he said. "You will not see her again." "Where will you take her?" He was silent for a moment. She realized the sounds of battle had ceased, save for the groans of the wounded and the distant rattle of gunfire. She was dimly aware of some humans staggering through the smoke and rubble of the strongpoint. Vindicator Prime, Lucian, and a few remaining Stormcasts strode through the piles of Skaven, making sure each bloody corpse was truly dead. "She will be taken to a place where she will be remembered," Cryptborn said at last, "where she will continue to serve the God King, as she has since the moment of her calling, until at last she is ready to cross the final threshold." "She deserves more than that." The man sighed, a rattling sound. "She does. So do we all. But existence is often cruel, and we must take our comforts where we can. Know that she will be amongst others who have suffered the same hardships. Know that she will be honored, and her deeds written into the annals of the lost. That will have to be enough." Tears stung Rion's eyes, and she nodded. She bent one last time to clasp Becerra's hand. She thought for a moment that the haze of blackness slipped from the stricken warrior's face, and her eyes sparkled once more with life. She felt Bez squeeze her hand with sudden strength, and then, perhaps, she simply imagined it. Her friend's head seemed to incline, as if nodding assent to her fate. "Thank you," said Rion, and let her go. Seraphs descended on wings of dark fire. They grasped the fallen hero, lifting Becerra's body into the skies. The warden strode to his waiting drake, which observed proceedings with somber dignity, the slain rat ogre laying torn and ripped at its feet. It spread its wings as Cryptborn climbed atop the seat strapped to its back. The skies, so long choked by sorcerous storm clouds, briefly cleared. A ray of light illuminated the ruins of Ratham's Crook as Becerra was borne away to whatever fate awaited her. The Warden of Lost Souls spoke the truth. Rion never saw her friend again.